So, as for getting your new export into Unity, first of all, keep in mind that VRChat's tools or SDK only supports specific versions of Unity. So, if you are well versed in the newer versions of Unity, Unity 6, for example, you're going to have to pull back a little bit and use Unity 2002.322F1. That is the most recent version of Unity that is supported by VRChat's creator companion. Okay, so once you're in Unity, you should have a very bare bones project once you begin. Going to assets and import new asset. Now I already have a few things in here because I actually went into an asset project that I started already, but I'm going to go through the steps anyway. So you just want to import new asset. You can do it from the assets menu, or you can come down to the assets window or the folder here, which is assets. It'll create that by default, and right click in there and you can choose import new asset. Okay, so I'm going to go into just a couple of things. I don't have the VRChat SDK installed on this computer, so I'll just talk about a few of the basic things you'll encounter and a couple of ways to get over them when it comes to just prepping the rig before you are ready to send it to the SDK or deal with the SDK at all. And you're going to click on the little arrow in the circle and expand out so you can see all the components that we're running with it. So we've got the armature, we've got the geometry, we've got another node here with some information about our geometry. Basically, it's like your shape and then the top level object surrounding the geometry. Select Donway himself, sorry. So once you have him selected, you want to go to the inspector and click on rig. And then under animation type, you have to switch this to humanoid, or else your VRChat SDK, once you have it installed, will not accept it when you try to publish. So first thing we do is choose humanoid, and we apply. Now what this does is it basically looks through the asset, finds the rig, and tries to recreate a version of that's going to work within Unity. Okay, so now we can select on this little man here, which is basically a representation of our rig, and we go to configure. Now what we do under configure is we need to make sure that it's actually associated all of the joints or bones with the correct elements within Unity. And so we can just quickly check things over. So we have hips, spine, chest, everything should correlate. So we have, even though this says spine joint in my case, it's actually the joint just below the chest bone in mine, but it's the correct one because the chest is it actually has an upper and a lower chest. Okay, so that is aligning correctly. And in here, instead of actually using it's using for the hips, it's using sort of the cog or the center of gravity on the rig, basically the bone that can move the entire thing. And that's going to be important later for a workaround that I've encountered that seems to help with another issue that just sort of negatively impacts my workflow. So you just go through and double check things. Now, one thing that I found in my case that I need to check on specifically was the hands. Because I do create extra bones sometimes in the hands to give myself a little more range of deformation when it comes to animation. And so when I brought that in here, it actually noticed that, but it assigned the bones just in a little wrong order. It basically just said it started with a bone that I didn't want to start with, and I want to start one bone higher. So I actually have to go in and reassign those. And it's actually not a difficult process. So simply, in this case, I've got the left and the right hand. Unfortunately, I haven't found a quick way to mirror these connections in here yet, even though there may be one. If you do know of one, feel free to place that in the comments. But for now, all you have to do is come in. You don't even have to select the bones here. You can just select them from the list. So come down to the list, pinky, and as you'll see on the hierarchy on the left side, it'll automatically select that bone, just so you can see where it is in the hierarchy. But what you can do is come over here to the right and just click on this little white dot, and you can choose the correct bone that you want to basically begin with at the end. And as you can see, this is one of the errors you get if you select the wrong bone, because it starts to get confused about the hierarchy. Now, as an alternative to going through and readjusting these bones, since I actually have saved this before, I can use something which will actually help me get into another element I was about to talk about. So once you actually have gone through and checked all of your bones and make sure everything's correct or reassigned what you had to, you want to basically click apply so that basically updates into the rig that's active. And then you also can go to mapping and you can save it out. You can save it into a file so that then you can later, if you need to, just load it back in. If you have to, for example, delete the asset and re-import it instead of having to redo this entire structure, you can just re-import from what you already have saved. Saves a lot of time. So once you're actually done, everything's what you want it to be. Oh, by the way, if you do have blend shapes and they're going to be controlling your jaw, there is actually no reason to keep your jaw joint active. So what you can do is you can go in and set that to none, and this will sort of mitigate an issue that is likely to occur later. So you can set it to none, so you can completely disable it. But once you're done with your bones, you come back out, and then we need to deal with the texture. So to make sure your texture is coming through just fine, your material, you can select the material as which is part of the character's hierarchy, and make sure you bring it in so you can actually modify the material so that it's actually something you use in VRChat. So in order to do that, again, you're going to select Donway or your imported asset in the assets area. Go to materials and then tell it to extract materials. And then it'll just ask you for a location where should it store those materials. You can, what I usually do is I'll make a folder and tell it to store them there. Sometimes it doesn't recognize the folder until you actually go into the folder and then come out of it. Just choose that folder and basically it'll save any materials there. Okay. And so as you can see in your assets folder, now we have a materials folder.